everyone. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to be, I guess the best way to start it off. How do you know if an object is living, if it's alive? Because that's what we're going to be looking at, the characteristics of living things. Now, I had a firsthand experience about a couple of years ago while I was out in the front yard of my house. I was doing a little work in the flower beds. I glanced over at the lawn and I noticed an object that I had never seen there before. Upon looking at the object, I just assumed that somebody had tossed a rock up in my front yard. It looked very much like this. Well, I stood there watching it for a while. First thing that I was looking for to determine whether it was alive or not is if it was going to move. Well, it never did move. It just stayed in that one position. Well, I got up close to it and I observed something else. It began to move. And what I found out, instead of it being a rock that was motionless, it was actually a box turtle, just like the one I'm holding here. And of course, when I got real close to it, it began to move. Now, Teresa here, the box turtle that I have here in my lab, it's kind of cold in here, so she's not doing a lot of moving. She's coming out now. But that little three-toed box turtle, once it saw me get too close, it really began to move. I don't know how people think that turtles are very slow, but Teresa, that turtle that was like Teresa, began to move very fast. And that let me know that she was alive. And we cannot use that as a determining factor whether something is alive or not, whether it's still or not, because we know that plants, they don't move. You don't ever see a plant just pull up its roots and start moving around looking for something to eat, do we? That plant's going to be very still. It's going to stand there with its roots embedded in the soil, and it's going to take in some things that it needs, which we call basic needs, and it's not going to move. So there are other characteristics that really help us determine whether something is living or not. Now, the rock, it did not move. And the rock really doesn't have any basic needs to fulfill, right? It's just going to be there. Now, as far as the basic needs, let's start out by talking about living things are made up of little bitty tiny, I guess you might say it's the smallest unit of life. They are called cells. Every living thing is made up of cells. And these cells have very special jobs that they do. Now, cells are part of certain types of tissue. And the tissue is made up of, it makes up certain organs that are in a living thing's body. And then the organs make up organ systems, such as the cardiac system, or the circulatory system, or the respiratory system that is found in humans or people. Now, those cells help the living thing go through what we call life process. Now, listen, guys. When you are a living thing to go through life processes, living things use energy. Now, where do they get the energy from? Well, basically, the ultimate source of energy for living things on our planet is the sun. We can look at some of the living things that live around us that we call plants. Or we can look at the animals that live around us, including ourselves. We all use energy. And as far as plants are concerned, they use the energy from the sun to go ahead and make their own food within their own body structure. As far as animals and ourselves, we have to eat something else. And what we eat, for example, we do eat plants. We're getting some of the sun's energy from the plants that we consume. Now, plants are considered to be producers simply because they take in three main ingredients to make their own food. They take in sunlight, they take in water, and they take in something called carbon dioxide. It's a gas that actually we breathe out, okay? Now, plants and animals, even living things that may fall in between that, we have microorganisms, all that, they respond to stimuli. And then what that means is they respond to something outside of their bodies if the conditions are just right. Take, for example, today, it's very cold. I went outside without my heavy coat a few minutes ago, and I began to shiver because it was so cold outside. That was me responding to an outside stimuli. A puppy will do the same thing. A dog will do the same thing. If it gets too cold, the first response to that stimuli, which is the cold air, is to start shivering. Now, plants also will respond to an outside stimuli. I have an ivy plant right here. And if you look at it, most of the growth is going to one direction. It's going that way. Well, I can remember when this plant was in my house, it was sitting on a table, and to this direction, there was a lamp. There was a light source. And the plant's response to that light being over here was to start growing toward that light. Because what did I say earlier? Plants need light. So it was going to something that it basically needs, okay? Now, there are some basic needs for living things. They need food, water, shelter, and space. Well, for this plant to get its food, what did it have to have? It had to have a light source. So that's what it was growing toward. This outside stimuli was drawing it to it. Now, something else that living things do. Living things reproduce. Plants usually reproduce by producing seeds, okay? And that seed would be something like this acorn. Now, one of the things that I want you to remember, if you were here with us today and it wasn't so cold outside, we would be taking a walk on one of our nature trails, and you would hear me talking about all the plants that are found in our forest over there. Now, one of the things I want you to remember, maybe I'll see you in the future, maybe we'll get a chance to take that hike in the Post Oak Preserve, is that the Post Oak Preserve is called the Post Oak Preserve simply because the most common plant that we have over there, and a lot of people don't really realize this, but trees are plants also, aren't they? The most common plant that we have over there, and I want you to remember this in case your teacher asks you later on, is the post oak tree. Trees are plants, and they make their own food. Now, if we were over there today, you probably wouldn't see a lot of greenery. You wouldn't see any leaves, and you might even think the tree is dead. But simply because we don't have a lot of sunlight, our daylight time is very short during the winter months. And so basically a lot of those trees, because they're not getting enough sunlight, they've gone into what we call dormancy. They've gone into hibernation like a bear. When will they wake up? When we start getting a little more daylight during the day in the season of spring. But the oak trees produce a seed to help them reproduce, because if conditions get just right, the acorn will also produce a new tree of the same kind. That's what reproduction is. Just like Teresa, she's a female. Turtles lay eggs to reproduce, okay? And also, that animal or that plant that is growing from the seed or from the egg, it is called an offspring. Now, over time, the offspring are going to grow and develop. That is another characteristic of living things, growing bigger and developing. That's something that living things do. And then they also adapt or they change with their environment. Just like the post oak trees over there, they're going to grow their leaves back when they start getting more daylight and the air temperature warms up. That means they're changing because of their surroundings. The air and the amount of light has changed. Now, I'm going to share this with you. An offspring that is caused by a seed going through development, the seed starts sprouting right here and it grows roots and there's part of it above the ground. That is called a seedling. That would be the offspring of that particular plant. Let's say that a chicken lays an egg, and that egg, once the egg hatches from the female chicken and the chicken sits on it, guess what? For 21 days, if the chicken sits on it, the hen sits on it, a new baby chick is going to be born. And I had something happen just a minute ago. It's not really about plants, but I've got a Curtonix quail here. And I just happened to look down at her in her cage, and she laid an egg right there. I saw her do it. So I want to share that with you guys. Come here, Patsy. This is Bessie, the Curtonix quail. And I tell you what, she's a good girl. She just laid this little egg, guys. And you know what? If she was to sit on this egg for about 18 days, guess what would happen? She would get an offspring. It would hatch into the same kind of animal that she is. That's reproduction, okay? So hopefully I've helped you understand a little bit about how we can identify living things from non-living things.